Everyone said the Ice King couldn't love. But his hands were shaking as he lifted my veil. Zuri's voice barely whispered as Dominic Caruso stood inches from her in the private corridor behind the chapel. The reception hummed with conversation on the other side of the wall. Guests still debating whether this marriage was real, or just another calculated move by a man famous for feeling nothing. "They're still talking about it out there," she said, her bouquet trembling between them. "Saying you only married me to look human. That you'll never even touch." His hand slid to the small of her back, pulling her flesh against him. His suit was immaculate, his expression controlled, but she felt his heartbeat thundering against her chest. "The rumors," Dominic's voice was rough in her ear, his other hand tangling in the base of her updo. "I needed everyone to believe them. A man with no heart has no weaknesses. No one to threaten. No one to take." His thumb traced her jawline with devastating gentleness. "But you, Zuri. You walked into my world in that stained apron, and I knew I'd burn down everything I built to keep you safe." Then his mouth found hers, and it wasn't the careful public kiss from the ceremony. This was 3 months of restraint breaking, of a man who'd pretended to be stone revealing he was flesh and fire beneath. By the time he pulled back, Zuri understood. She hadn't married a man incapable of feeling. She'd married one who felt so intensely he'd hidden behind ice for survival, until she became more important than his armor. The Caruso estate gate swung open, and Zuri's breath stopped. She had scrubbed floors in mansions before, delivered room service to penthouses, but this was different. This was her snow. Crystal chandeliers the size of her entire studio apartment hung from vaulted ceilings painted with frescoes. Black marble floors stretched in every direction, polished so perfectly she could see a terrified woman in an intricate white gown staring back at her, clutching her bouquet like it was the last piece of her old life. "This way, Mrs. Caruso." The woman who spoke wore a severe black dress, her gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. Her name was Mrs. Albano, head of household staff. She had been waiting at the entrance with 5 other staff members, all standing in perfect formation. Not one had smiled during the formal introduction. Not when Zuri thanked them nervously in her accented English. Not when she stumbled slightly on the steps in her heels. Now Mrs. Albano walked ahead through corridors that seemed endless. Zuri's satin wedding shoes whispered against the marble. Each sound felt too loud in the cathedral quiet of the mansion, announcing her as an intruder in a world she didn't belong to. The diner's neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat. 2 in the morning, and Zuri was wiping down tables that would never be clean no matter how hard she scrubbed. Grease had seeped into the vinyl booths years ago, becoming part of the fabric itself, just like exhaustion had seeped into her bones. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the hospital in Lagos. Her mother's condition was deteriorating. They needed an answer about the treatment. They needed money she didn't have. Zuri pressed her palms against her eyes. She'd already sold everything worth selling. Already begged every loan officer in a 50-mile radius. The math was simple and cruel. Her mother would die, and there was nothing Zuri could do to stop it. The door chimed. She looked up, forcing her customer service smile into place, but it died on her lips. 3 men in suits that cost more than her annual rent stood in the doorway. The fluorescent lights seemed to dim around them, as if even electricity knew to be cautious. The one in front was younger than the others, maybe 35, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Cold. Perfect. Untouchable. He looked at her the way a shark looks at everything, assessing whether it was food or irrelevant. "We're closed," Zuri said, but her voice came out smaller than she intended. "You're Zuri Mensah." It wasn't a question. His accent was American but shaped by something older, something that came from stone villages and blood oaths. Her heart kicked against her ribs. "Who's asking?" "Someone who knows your mother is dying." He walked toward her, his footsteps silent despite the cracked linoleum. "Someone who knows you've been denied by every bank, every charity, every person you've begged." He stopped on the other side of the counter. "Someone who can save her life." Zuri's hands trembled. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady them. "What do you want?" "I need a wife." He said it the way someone might say they needed a car or a lawyer, transactional, temporary. 1 year. Public appearances. No expectations beyond what the cameras see. You're insane. I'm Dominic Caruso. He placed a business card on the counter between them. And you have 48 hours before your mother's treatment window closes permanently. The card was heavy, expensive. Embossed. Real. Why would you? Because I need someone with everything to lose and nothing to gain by betraying me. His eyes held hers, and for a moment she saw something flicker behind the ice. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. As if he understood what desperation tasted like. Someone who'll disappear back to her life when this is over and never speak of it again. He turned toward the door. 48 hours, Miss Mensah. After that, I'll find someone else, and your mother will run out of time. The door closed behind him. The neon sign flickered. Zuri looked down at the card in her shaking hands, and knew she'd already made her choice. The chapel was too beautiful for a lie. White roses climbed every column, their perfume thick enough to taste. Candles flickered in crystal holders, casting soft shadows across faces Zuri didn't recognize. 200 guests, and she knew none of them. They were Dominic's world, sharp suits, sharper eyes, women dripping in diamonds that caught the light like warnings. Zuri stood in the bridal suite, staring at herself in the floor-length mirror. The dress had arrived at her apartment 3 days ago in a box bigger than her refrigerator. Ivory lace that hugged every curve. A veil that pooled at her feet like water. She looked like a bride. She felt like an actress who'd forgotten her lines. It's time, Mrs. Caruso. Mrs. Albano stood in the doorway, her expression as warm as February. She'd been assigned to Zuri yesterday, teaching her how to walk, how to smile, how to exist in Dominic's world without embarrassing him. Every lesson felt like a reminder that Zuri didn't belong. The music started. Wagner, Mrs. Albano had told her. She didn't know Wagner. She knew her mother's gospel songs, the ones that shook the walls of their little church back home. The doors opened. Every head turned. Zuri's legs moved on instinct, carrying her down an aisle that seemed miles long. The whispers started immediately, barely concealed behind polite smiles. Heard he's paying her. Nobody even knows who she is. Business arrangement, obviously. He doesn't even look at women, everyone knows that. Then she saw Dominic. He stood at the altar in a black tuxedo that made him look like midnight itself. His face was composed, unreadable, the same cold mask he'd worn in the diner. For a moment, Zuri's chest tightened with the confirmation that this was exactly what everyone said. A transaction. Nothing more. Then his eyes found hers. Something shifted. His jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. His hands relaxed at his sides, curled into fists and then released, as if he was physically restraining himself. And when she reached him, when she stood close enough to see the muscle jumping in his throat, he looked at her the way a drowning man looks at shore. The officiant spoke words Zuri barely heard. Her hands shook as Dominic took them in his. His grip was steady, warm, and for a moment she forgot about the whispers, the contract, the year she'd sold. You may kiss the bride. The chapel held its breath. Dominic's hand curved against her cheek, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her forget to breathe. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when his lips touched hers it wasn't the cold, performative kiss she'd expected. It was soft, reverent, real. Behind them the whispers died. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers for just a heartbeat, and she heard him whisper so quietly only she could hear. I'm sorry. Then the mask returned, and he tucked her hand into his arm as they turned to face 200 people who thought they knew exactly what this was. None of them saw his thumb tracing circles on her wrist, or the way his grip tightened when they walked past his coldest rivals. The Ice King had chosen his queen, and the look in his eyes suggested no one should forget it. The mansion swallowed her whole. Zuri stood in the entrance hall as staff members she didn't know carried her single suitcase up a staircase that split into 2 wings. Everything echoed, footsteps, voices, the click of Mrs. Albano's heels against marble that stretched in every direction like a frozen lake. Your room is in the east wing, Mrs. Albano said, already walking. Mr. Caruso's quarters are in the west. You'll have your own bathroom, sitting room, and closet. Breakfast is at 7. Dinner at 8. You're expected to be punctual. Zuri followed. Her wedding dress replaced by a simple navy dress that had appeared in her apartment that morning along with 12 others. Someone had known her size, her measurements, everything about her body before she'd even signed the contract. The hallways seemed endless. Oil paintings of stern-faced men watched from the walls, Carusos from generations past, Mrs. Albano explained, their names and dates of death recited like a prayer. Most hadn't lived past 50. One had died at 32. What happened to him? Zuri asked, stopping in front of a portrait of a young man with Dominic's eyes. Mrs. Albano's expression didn't change. He trusted the wrong person. They climbed another staircase. Zuri glimpsed rooms through open doors, a library with books stacked to the ceiling, a dining room with a table that could seat 40, a room filled with nothing but white sheets covering furniture like ghosts. The house felt alive and dead at the same time, breathing with history and suffocating under the weight of it. Her room was larger than her entire apartment had been. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in cream silk. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking gardens so perfect they looked painted. A walk-in closet already held more clothes than she'd owned in her lifetime. Mr. Caruso requests you join him for dinner tonight at 8, Mrs. Albano said. I'll send someone to help you dress. I can dress myself. The older woman's smile was knife-thin. Of course, Mrs. Caruso. Alone, Zuri sank onto the bed. Through the walls she heard muffled voices, Dominic's, low and controlled, and another man's, urgent and angry. She moved to the shared wall, pressing her ear against the silk wallpaper. Can't keep pretending she's just another contract. She is just another contract. Dominic's voice was ice. 1 year. Nothing changes. Everything changes. You brought an outsider into this house. Marcello's already asking questions. The Russos think you're going soft. And that stunt at the wedding was necessary. Was dangerous. They're watching her now. Watching you. One mistake and they'll use her against you. Silence. Then. Let them try. Footsteps approached her door. Zuri jumped back from the wall, her heart hammering. But they passed by, fading down the hall. She walked to the balcony, wrapping her arms around herself against the evening chill. Below, men in dark suits patrolled the grounds. Security cameras tracked every angle. The gardens were beautiful, but the 10-foot walls surrounding them told the truth. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress, and she'd just become its most vulnerable point. The gala glittered like a beautiful trap. Zuri descended the mansion's main staircase in a gown the color of midnight, sapphire silk that pooled at her feet, cut low enough to make Mrs. Albano purse her lips in disapproval. Diamonds Dominic had sent to her room that afternoon hung cold against her collarbone. She'd never worn anything that cost more than a car. Now she wore something worth more than a house. Dominic waited at the bottom of the stairs in a tuxedo that made him look like he owned the world. Maybe he did. When his eyes traveled up from her heels to her face, something dangerous flickered behind the ice. You'll stay beside me tonight, he said, offering his arm. Don't speak to anyone I haven't introduced you to. Don't accept drinks from anyone but the waiters. Don't breathe without permission. His jaw tightened. Don't make yourself a target. The ballroom was an ocean of wealth and cruelty. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across faces that smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. Women in gowns that cost small fortunes whispered behind champagne flutes. Men in $1,000 suits watched Zuri the way wolves watch a deer that's wandered from the herd. Dominic's hand never left the small of her back. He introduced her to people whose names she immediately forgot. Politicians, judges, men who ran legitimate businesses that laundered illegitimate money. Everyone smiled. Everyone lied. She could feel it in the air like electricity before a storm. Caruso. A voice cut through the music. I see you've brought your investment. The man was in his 50s, silver-haired, with a smile that made Zuri's skin crawl. 2 younger men flanked him like bookends. Marcello. Dominic's voice dropped 10 degrees. I don't remember inviting you. It's a charity event. Everyone's invited. Marcello's eyes slid to Zuri, assessing her the way someone might assess livestock. Though I'm surprised you'd bring her. What is she, exactly? The help? Did you pull her straight from the kitchen? The ballroom's conversation dimmed. People were listening now, pretending not to. She cleans up well, I'll give you that, Marcello continued, circling them slowly. But you can take the girl out of the slum, Caruso. Can't take the slum out of. Dominic moved faster than thought. One moment Marcello was smiling. The next, Dominic had him by the throat, slammed against a marble column hard enough to crack it. The champagne flute in Marcello's hand shattered against the floor. His guards reached for their weapons, but froze when Dominic's men materialized from the shadows, guns appearing like magic. The entire ballroom held its breath. You'll apologize to my wife. Dominic's voice was quiet, conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. You'll apologize and then you'll leave. Or I'll break every bone in your body and let you crawl out. Marcello's face was turning purple. I apologize, Mrs. Caruso. Dominic released him. Marcello collapsed, gasping, his guards dragging him toward the exit. The music resumed. Conversations restarted as if nothing had happened. But everyone was looking at Zuri differently now. Dominic took her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Shall we dance? The meeting room fell silent when Zuri walked in. 6 men in expensive suits sat around a table of polished mahogany, their conversations dying mid-sentence. They looked at her the way the gala guests had looked at her 3 weeks ago. Like she was a decoration that had wandered into the wrong room. Gentlemen. Zuri set a folder on the table. Her hands didn't shake anymore. We need to talk about the protection fees in Little Lagos. Dominic sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He'd told her this morning she could sit in on the business meetings. He hadn't told her she could speak. Mrs. Caruso. The man to Dominic's right, Antonio, his second in command, smiled without warmth. Perhaps you're confused about what we do here. We collect what we're owed. That's how this works. You're collecting from people who have nothing. Zuri opened the folder, spreading photographs across the table. This is Mama Okonkwo's restaurant. She pays you $3,000 a month. Her profit margin is $4,000. You're taking 75% of everything she earns. She pays for protection, Antonio said. From who? The only people threatening her are you. The room temperature dropped. One of the men, Vincent, she'd learned his name last week, leaned back in his chair. With all due respect, Mrs. Caruso, you've been here a month. You don't understand how things work. I understand you're bleeding my community dry. Zuri met his eyes. And I understand that when Mama Okonkwo can't pay, you'll shut her down. Then the Russos will move in, open their own place, and you'll lose that territory entirely. She had their attention now. I'm proposing a partnership model. Reduce the fees to 20%. In exchange, these businesses become active allies. They report on Russo movements. They provide safe houses. They give you eyes and ears in a community that currently hates you. They'll hate us either way, Vincent said. They'll hate you less if you're not starving their children. Antonio's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. Dominic, are you going to let her? She's not finished. Dominic's voice cut through the room like a blade. He hadn't moved, hadn't even looked at her, but every man at the table straightened. Continue. Zuri pulled out a spreadsheet. I've run the numbers. You'll take a 30% reduction in immediate revenue, but you'll gain intelligence worth 3 times that. Plus, when immigration raids happen, and they will, these businesses will warn your operations instead of celebrating when you're caught. Silence. Then Antonio slammed his hand on the table. This is what happens when you bring in an outsider. She's been here 5 minutes and she's trying to dismantle everything we've built. What you've built, Zuri said quietly, is a house of cards. The Russos are offering these same businesses protection at 15%. How long before they all switch sides? Vincent exchanged glances with the others. Is that true? It's true, Dominic said. He finally looked at Zuri, and something flickered in his expression. Not quite approval but close. I've had it confirmed. Antonio's jaw clenched. Even if we agree to this, and I'm not saying we are, what makes you think they'll trust us now? Zuri smiled. Because I'm one of them. And they trust me. The gun felt heavier than it looked. Zuri stood in the mansion's basement. A space she hadn't known existed until Dominic led her down this morning. It wasn't damp or dark like basements should be. It was pristine, clinical. A shooting range stretched 50 feet, targets hanging like silent witnesses at the end. If you're going to keep making yourself visible, Dominic said, standing behind her, you need to know how to protect yourself. He'd been different since their argument 3 days ago. Not warmer exactly, but present. He'd started joining her for breakfast, asking about the community center. Last night, he'd sat in her room for an hour, teaching her which families in his world were allies and which were waiting for him to show weakness. Now his hands moved to her waist, adjusting her stance. Feet shoulder-width apart. Dominant foot back slightly. His touch burned through the thin fabric of her shirt. Zuri tried to focus on the target, but all she could feel was the solid warmth of him behind her. The way his breath ghosted across her neck when he spoke. Both hands on the grip. Firm but not tense. His hands covered hers, guiding them. Look down the sight. Breathe out slowly. Between heartbeats, you squeeze. The gun fired. The recoil jolted through her arms, but Dominic's body absorbed most of it, keeping her steady. The target showed a whole 3 inches left of center. Again. They practiced until her arms ached. With each shot, he adjusted her position. A hand on her hip, fingers correcting her grip, his voice low and patient in her ear. It was the most he'd touched her since the wedding kiss, and something was shifting between them in the cordite-scented air. Why are you really doing this? Zuri asked, lowering the gun. Teaching me. Being here. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When she turned to face him, she found him closer than expected, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Because Vincent was right, he said finally. You are making yourself visible. And I can't. His jaw clenched. I won't lose you to my own negligence. The contract says 1 year. Then I disappear. Why would it matter if? It matters. The words came out rough, almost angry. His hand lifted, hesitating inches from her face before his fingers finally brushed her cheek. It shouldn't. But it does. Zuri's heart hammered. Dominic. I told myself this was business. That you were a solution to a problem. His thumb traced her lower lip, and his carefully constructed mask cracked. But when Marcelo spoke to you that way, I wanted to kill him. When Vincent suggested cutting funding to your center, I nearly broke his jaw. And when you're not in the house, I can't think about anything except whether you're safe. The rumors were armor. If no one thought I could care about anyone, no one would look for leverage. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. But you walked into my world with your kindness and your fire, and suddenly the armor doesn't fit anymore. His lips brushed hers, tentative, asking permission. When she didn't pull away, the kiss deepened, slow and desperate, like a man finally allowing himself to feel after years of numbness. The call came at 2 in the morning. Zuri jerked awake to her phone vibrating against the nightstand. An unknown number. She almost ignored it. Dominic had warned her about answering calls she didn't recognize, but something made her pick up. Mrs. Caruso? A woman's voice, trembling. Please, you have to help. It's my daughter. She's sick. The hospital, they won't see her without insurance. And I remembered you helped Maria's sister. And I didn't know who else to call. Zuri sat up, her heart already responding before her mind could catch up. Slow down. What's your name? Teresa. I work at the community center. In the kitchen. Please, she's burning up, I don't know what to do. 20 minutes later, Zuri was dressed and moving through the dark hallways. She'd texted Rocco, but he hadn't responded. The security at the gate would let her out. They always did when she went to the center. This was different, but it was still her people. Still her responsibility. The car Dominic had assigned her sat in the circular drive. She'd barely learned to navigate the city, but her phone's GPS could guide her to the address Teresa had given. A neighborhood on the edge of syndicate territory. The streets were empty at this hour. Street lights flickered like dying stars. Zuri's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the buildings grew more decrepit, the darkness more complete. The address led to a warehouse. Not an apartment. Not a hospital. Zuri's instincts screamed. She reached for her phone just as the car doors locked automatically. The engine died. And from the shadows men emerged. The driver's door was ripped open. Hands grabbed her, hauling her out before she could scream. A cloth covered her mouth, chemical sweat drowning her protests. The world tilted, blurred. Through the haze she saw him. Vincent. Dominic's oldest advisor. The one who'd argued most against the community center. "Nothing personal, Mrs. Caruso," he said, his face swimming in and out of focus. "But you've become too much of a distraction." Dominic's lost his edge. "Soft. All because of you." He nodded to someone behind her. "The Russos will pay well for Caruso's wife. And when he comes for you, and he will, they'll be waiting." The last thing Zuri saw before darkness took her was her phone on the ground. Screen shattered. Dominic's name still on the screen from where she'd almost called him. Dominic knew something was wrong before Rocco burst into his study. Zuri's side of their newly formed connection, that invisible thread he'd been denying for weeks, felt cold. Empty. "She's gone." Rocco's face was pale. "Security footage shows her leaving 2 hours ago. Alone." Her car's GPS went dark in the warehouse district. Dominic's world narrowed to a single crystalline point of rage. "Get everyone. Now." His voice was death itself. "And find Vincent." But Vincent's office was already empty. His phone disconnected. And on Dominic's desk sat a single white rose, the calling card of the Russo family. They'd taken her. His wife. His weakness. His everything. And they'd used her goodness as the weapon. Zuri woke to the smell of mildew and rust. Her head throbbed where they'd hit her. Zip ties cut into her wrists, binding her to a metal chair in what looked like an abandoned factory. Moonlight sliced through broken windows, illuminating 3 men playing cards at a table 10 feet away. They hadn't noticed she was awake yet. Her wedding ring was gone. They'd taken her phone, her shoes, the small knife Dominic had made her carry in her purse. But they'd missed the tracking device he'd sewn into the hem of her dress 3 weeks ago, after the gala. She'd laughed when he showed her, called him paranoid. Now she prayed it was still working. The door opened. A man walked in wearing a suit too expensive for this place, salt and pepper hair. A smile that belonged to boardrooms and country clubs, not warehouses that smelled like blood. "Mrs. Caruso. Forgive the accommodations." He pulled up a chair, sitting close enough that she could smell his cologne. "My name is Anthony Russo. Your husband and I have been competitors for some time." Zuri said nothing. "He'll come for you, of course. That's the point." Russo leaned back, studying her like an interesting painting. "Vincent told us everything. How Dominic's changed since you arrived. How he nearly killed Marcello over an insult. How he watches you like you're the only real thing in his world." His smile widened. The Ice King melted. "And that makes him predictable." "He won't come alone," Zuri said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Oh, I'm counting on that. He'll bring his entire organization. And we'll be ready." Russo stood, brushing invisible lint from his jacket. "By morning, the Caruso Empire will be mine, and you'll be a widow. Try to get some rest." Dominic stood in the surveillance room, watching footage of the warehouse on 12 different screens. 50 armed men surrounded the building. Snipers on every roof. Tripwires on every entrance. The Russos had turned it into a killing box. "It's a trap," Marco said quietly. "You go in there, you don't come out." "I know. They want you to choose. The Empire or the girl." Dominic's hands clenched. Every strategic bone in his body screamed to negotiate, to trade something else, to find another way. This was exactly what Vincent had warned him about. Caring made him vulnerable, predictable, weak. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Zuri in that sapphire dress. Heard her laugh when she tried to teach him words in her language. Felt her hand steady on the gun as he taught her to protect herself from a world he'd dragged her into. She'd signed a contract to save her mother. Given up a year of her life for someone she loved. What kind of man would he be if he gave up less? "Call everyone," Dominic said, his voice cold and final. "Every family that owes me. Every favor I'm owed. Every alliance I've built." He turned to face his men, and they stepped back from what they saw in his eyes. "I'm burning it all down. The territories, the treaties, the empire, all of it. Nothing matters except getting her back." Rocco smiled slowly. "About damn time." The first explosion lit up the night like a second dawn. Zuri felt the shockwave rattle the warehouse walls. The men guarding her scrambled, shouting into radios that crackled with panic and gunfire. Then the lights went out, plunging everything into darkness broken only by muzzle flashes and searchlights sweeping through broken windows. Someone cut her zip ties in the chaos. Strong hands pulled her up, and she recognized Rocco's voice. "Stay low. Move." He led her through corridors that reeked of smoke and cordite, stepping over bodies she tried not to look at. Outside, the warehouse district had become a war zone. Cars burned, men scattered like ants from a kicked hill, and cutting through it all like a blade through silk. Dominic. He moved with terrifying precision, flanked by what looked like an army. Not just his men. She recognized faces from the gala, families who'd smiled politely at their wedding. He'd called in every debt, cashed in every alliance, and they'd answered. For her. Their eyes met across the burning chaos. Relief cracked through his control for just a moment before he was moving, crossing the distance in seconds, his hands framing her face. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Behind them, Anthony Russo was dragged forward by two of Dominic's men, zip-tied and bleeding from a cut above his eye. Vincent was already dead. She'd seen his body in the corridor. "It's over," Dominic said, not to Russo, but to the assembled crowd of syndicate members now emerging from the shadows. "Vincent's betrayal ends here. The Russo's territory is forfeit." He pulled Zuri against his side, his arm unmovable around her waist. "And anyone who thinks my wife is a weakness will learn the same lesson Russo just did." 3 months later, Zuri stood on the mansion's terrace, watching the sun set over gardens that no longer felt like a prison. The community center had expanded into 3 locations. The syndicate's operations had shifted. Still powerful, still dangerous, but operating with a code that protected rather than exploited the vulnerable. It hadn't been easy. 2 families had tested Dominic's resolve. Both had learned that the Ice King's thaw didn't mean weakness. It meant he now had something worth unleashing hell to protect. Arms circled her waist from behind. Dominic rested his chin on her shoulder, and she leaned back into the warmth of him. "The lawyer called," he murmured. "Your mother's cancer is in remission. She wants to visit next month." Zuri closed her eyes, tears pressing hot against her lids. "She'll love the gardens. She'll love you." He turned her to face him, his thumb brushing away the tear that escaped. "The strongest woman I know." She smiled. "I'm just a waitress who got lucky." "No." His kiss was soft against her forehead, then her lips. "You're the queen who taught a king how to feel, and proved that the most dangerous thing in this world isn't power. It's having something worth protecting." Below them the city glittered. Their city now, built not on fear alone, but on the balance they'd struck together. His strength and her compassion, his shadows and her light. The contract had expired 2 months ago. Neither of them had mentioned it. Some agreements, it turned out, didn't need paper to be binding.